Would you like to hear what God has to say this morning? Let's open our Bibles to Genesis chapter 5, please. Genesis chapter 5. Everywhere we turn, we're hearing about people's opinions and what they want to say, but how many people want to hear what God has to say? Man, we do. So today is Grandparents' Day, and why do we do this? We do this because it's really needed to honor the elderly among us. In Kenya, all you have to do is get gray hair and you are instantly honored. In America, not so much, right? Our culture values people that are youthful and fit and young, and when a person becomes unyouthful, unfit, and unyoung, it's kind of like, you're phased out. That's not good. That's not good. I came across some quotes this week that talk about what it's like to grow old. Time may be a great healer, but it's a lousy beautician. Here's another one. No one should grow old who isn't ready to appear ridiculous. I laughed at that one. Number 3. You know you're getting old when you stoop to tie your shoelaces and wonder what else you could do while you're down there. Another one. You can live to be 100 if you give up all the things that make you want to live to be 100. Another one. At age 20, we worry about what others think of us. At age 40, we don't care about what they think of us. And at age 60, we discover they haven't been thinking of us at all. And then from Woody Allen, he said, I don't want to achieve immortality through my work. I want to achieve it through not dying. Younger folks need to understand that it is tough to get older. So we need a grandparents/elderly day to just be able to appreciate those of us who are continually getting more struggle as we live and age in this life. So that's what we're doing this morning. And I want to begin by talking to all those who are grandparents or grandparents' age. How many of you would qualify for that? Put your hand up if you are grandparents or grandparents' age. That's a good number of our congregation. Let me ask you, do you ever look at our present generation and wonder, are they going to make it? You wonder, how can things continue on? I mean, we know, we've seen the history of this world and our country, and we're just saying it can't survive much longer. You might feel as an older person that God may have, as you're winding down in your energy and you're being in the center of things, that God may have put you on the shelf and you're just no longer of importance in this world. But God absolutely says, no way. Absolutely no way. Grandparent age, great-grandparent age, you can have a huge impact upon the future generation of this world if you live a certain way. And that certain way is before us here in Genesis chapter 5. As you influence your children, your grandchildren, and your great-grandchildren, you will have a powerful impact upon the future of generations. Genesis 5 talks about one of my favorite Bible characters, and that's Enoch. Enoch in this chapter is 65 years old when he becomes the father of Methuselah. And you remember who he was. He was the greatest senior citizen of all time, right? Methuselah. How old? Do you remember how old he was when he died? 969. Just shy of 1,000 years. Can you imagine? That was his son. That was Enoch's son. Look at Genesis chapter 5 and at verse 22. It says, Then Enoch walked with God 300 years after he became the father of Methuselah, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Enoch were 365 years. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Now, if that's all we had, you'd say, well, what in the world is that talking about? Well, Hebrews elaborates. Hebrews 11:5 says, It was by faith that Enoch was taken up to heaven without dying. Suddenly he disappeared because God took him. But before he was taken up, he was approved as pleasing to God. Enoch had a reputation. We all have reputations, right? Can't help it. You just live in this world, you're going to gain a reputation. His reputation was, that man walks with God. Wouldn't you like that reputation about yourself? Not just that you're a Christian, but the people say, she walks with God. Just like two people would walk off down a path going through the forest, you and God walk together. That person and God walks together. Wouldn't that be a great reputation? That's what the reputation that Enoch had. And then imagine if one day you went missing. And then people concluded, well, you know what? She must have just gone off on one of her walks with God and God took her home. That's the reputation that Enoch had when he went missing. People just assumed, oh, they walked off together one day and God just took them. And they were exactly right. He's one of the two people in the Bible who don't have a death. Enoch. The other is, do you remember? Elijah. What did Enoch leave behind? What did he leave behind when he was taken up to God? A great influence upon his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Look at verse 25, Genesis 5:25. When Methuselah had lived 187 years, he became the father of Lamech. And then jump down to verse 28. Lamech lived 182 years and became the father of a son, and now he called his name Noah. Stop there. All right. So Enoch had a great-grandson named Noah. His great-grandson was Noah. Of course, we know all about Noah. It says in Genesis 6:9, this is the account of Noah. Noah was a righteous man and blameless among the people of his time, and he walked with God. He walked with God, his great-grandson. You know, there are many passages in the Bible that command us to walk with God. What does the Lord require of you? To do justice, love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. There's lots of Bible verses that talk about this, and yet the Bible only mentions two people that actually walked with God. That doesn't mean others didn't, because certainly lots of Old Testament, New Testament characters walked with God, but it only mentions two by name. One of them is Enoch, and it says it twice about him. And the other person is his great-grandson, Noah. He walked with God. Do you think that was just a coincidence? That of all the people in the Bible, they happen to be in the same family line. In fact, it was the great-grandfather and the grandson who walked with God. I think it's much more likely that Enoch passed down through his family this loving, close, walking relationship with God. And Enoch influenced the future. I mean, look at Noah. There was no one in Noah's day who loved God and was faithful to God like Noah. Nobody except him. No one preached to his generation about turning to God. For 120 years he preached while he built the ark. And why was Noah that type of man? I think it's very clear. It was because of the influence of Enoch, his great-grandfather, had upon the generations, and it came down to him. Enoch walked with God, and his great-grandson walked with God, and it changed the world. Grandparents, are you put on a shelf of unimportance just because you're not in the center of things anymore, just because your body isn't functioning the way it should anymore? Absolutely not. Enoch teaches us a lesson, and this is in your insert. The lesson from Enoch. Grandparents can be a powerful influence upon their families by walking with God. Grandparents can be a powerful influence upon their families by walking with God. Influence upon your children, upon your grandchildren, upon your great-grandchildren. Your example of living life close to God. Do not diminish your importance. Your faith can affect the future generations. I wrote down some things that I came across a list that grandparents can do for their grandchildren. Number one, teach them about God and spiritual things. Grandparents, great-grandparents, are you taking that opportunity? Teach them about God. Talk about Him. And number two, guide them towards good marriages by modeling a good marriage. Number three, don't curse and swear, but show them an example of how to handle frustrations in a godly way. Number 4, when you blow it, admit it. Ask them for forgiveness, and by doing that, show them an example of how to handle sin the right way when they sin. Number 4, tell them that you love them often. 5, play with them. 6, pray with them. Notice the good things in them and not just the bad things. Share your past life and the life lessons that you learned with them. And tell them how Christ changed you and is continuing to change you. In other words, just interact with your grandchildren, great-grandchildren, by letting them know about God in your life, all that He's done, and all that you're looking forward to do. Just talk it up all the time. And of course, you can't do that if you don't have a close relationship with God, so make sure you are walking with God. Set aside things that diminish your obedience to God. Kill those things in your life and make it your goal every day to walk with Him, talk with Him. As two people would walk down a path in the woods, live that way with God every day. You know, not just, well, my devotion time is my time with God. All day long have to be your time with God. Enoch teaches us this great lesson. The great-grandparents are not done yet. That you can have a powerful influence upon your family if you would just, you yourself, make sure you are walking with God. Grandparents, do you need to change anything? Change that. Make sure that is your reputation. My great-grandfather, my grandmother, he walks with God. Do whatever it takes to gain that reputation, and you have a powerful influence like Enoch did. Do whatever it takes to do that, grandparents and great-grandparents. I listed here two things grandparents should never do. This is on your insert. I ran across this, and I thought this was good. Number 1, don't dishonor their parents. 2 things grandparents should never do to their grandchildren. Don't dishonor their parents. If you disrespect their parents, they are going to disrespect their parents. And a house divided cannot stand. So don't be a part of that. If there's a disagreement between the parents, they're squabbling, or between the kids and the parents, maybe there's a separation, maybe there's a divorce, teach the children that they still need to honor and respect their parents. Because that's God's command. So number 1, don't dishonor their parents. And number 2, in your insert, don't change their parents' rules. Don't change their parents' rules. God has a chain of command that He has made, a chain of authority. And right over those kids are their parents. It's not you, grandparent. You're involved in there, but the one in the chain of command right above them is their parents. So when they make rules, follow the rules. I remember one day when we left our son Samuel with his grandparents, and we said, hey, he's going through some stuff. We don't want him to have any chocolate. No chocolate. We came back, all around his mouth was chocolate. It was like, grandparents, yes, you love your kids. Yes, your grandkids, and yes, you want to spoil them. But if the parents give you orders, they're the ones in charge, the most in charge. Follow that chain of command. If they say, hey, bedtime needs to be at 8, follow the directions of the parents. Whatever it needs to be, don't change the rules of the parents on things that are things that matter. We don't want to disrupt God's chain of command that He has put in the Bible. So grandparents, Enoch is a wonderful example to all of us about how you can change the future. You're not done yet. You are not done yet. Continue to walk with God on a personal level and let that just flow out of you as you interact with your kids, grandkids, and great-grandkids. You can do that. Make sure that you are doing it. Now, let me talk for a moment to the younger people. How many of you would say that you are under grandparent age? Under grandparent age. Here's a real quick one up here. Others? Okay. Under grandparent age. As I said, our culture does not value getting older and becoming elderly. Our culture tends to say, hey, you know, you used to be in the mix and in the middle of things, but now you're over here, and so we're kind of going to forget about you. The word for it is actually ageism, where you discriminate on about someone because of how old they are and kind of push them aside. You know, the Bible does the exact opposite. Exact opposite. God, in the law, Leviticus 19:32, show your fear of God. How? By standing up in the presence of elderly people and showing respect for the aged. I am the Lord. In other words, you better obey this. I'm the Lord. I'm the one in charge. You do this. Now, this was the Old Testament law of Moses. And you might say, well, isn't that rather micromanaging things? I mean, you've got the laws of the nation, and one of the things that you got to do is stand up when an elderly person comes into the room. That's important to God. And maybe that's micromanaging or not, but God says you need to respect the elderly. The opposite of what our culture does. You know, kind of go over here because you're not important anymore. No, you give honor and respect to the elderly people. The Jews were not the only ones. The Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans did this. Sometimes it was considered a crime if a young man did not stand up, that you could actually be punished and go to jail for. On other occasions, if you didn't let an older man go ahead of you in line, or if you contradicted an older person, that was considered a crime. So that wasn't just this one culture. A lot of the ancient cultures did this, and it's to our loss that we don't do that today. I mean, is that something God commands us to do? No, we do not live under the Old Testament, the Old Covenant of Moses, but we do live under the New Testament, the law of Christ now, and he pretty much repeats the same thing in Ephesians 6:2, honor your father and mother. Honor. Now, what does it mean to honor? If I had to ask you to write down the definition of honor. Honor means to highly value something. Highly value something. I ran across an article this week about someone opened up a box out in Lucasfilm's headquarters in San Francisco, an old cardboard box, and they pulled out this model of a X-Wing TIE fighter, if you know anything about Star Wars, and it had been missing for 40 years, and it was one of the main ones that they used in the first 1977 Star Wars movie. People lost their minds. These die-hard Star Wars fans just went crazy. This hadn't been found since they filmed. And they're going to start an auction on it soon, where the beginning price for this model is going to be $400,000. You got a pretty sweet home for $400,000, or you can get the model. That's that highly valuing something, okay? I recognize that most of you aren't going to identify with that. How about if I brought in here the world record breaker for the largest white-tailed deer rack? You know how many points it has? 47 points. I heard that. You value that, right? That's pretty impressive. Ladies, how about if I brought in here the world record holder for the largest diamond ever? It's 530 carats. That's roughly like a small lemon. What would we do if we brought these things in here? We'd all be like, we'd be highly honoring it as valuable. That is what God says do for elderly people, especially your parents, grandparents. Highly value them as really, really expensive, important. The opposite is to dishonor, which is do not treat them as valuable. To treat them as ordinary. God says do not treat your parents, grandparents, elderly people as ordinary. Treat them as special. And if you will not, man, in the Old Testament there were very severe consequences for this. Deuteronomy 27:16, cursed is he who dishonors his father and mother. God will put a curse upon, under the Old Testament law, put a curse upon a young man, young woman who would dishonor his or her parents. Proverbs 20:20, he who curses his father and mother, his lamp will go out in a time of darkness. In other words, you've got trouble and you're in the dark, God's not going to be there for you. You'll be under his curse if you curse your parents. Leviticus 29:9 gets a little stronger. If anyone curses his father and mother, let him be put to death. There were things that brought the death penalty under the Old Testament law, and one of them is you just curse at your parents, and you're gone. And Proverbs 30:17 says, the eye that disrespects a father and rejects a mother, The ravens of the valley will pick it out, and the vultures will eat it. That's a poetic way of saying you're going to get in trouble. Do not disrespect your father or reject your mother. Very, very important to God. And again, are we under the Old Testament law that we're supposed to kill people who disrespect their parents? No. We're under the New Testament law, though. And God's feelings are still the same. You know, when we see these specific laws in the Old Testament saying to do this or that, and we no longer have to do this or that, but the feelings that generated that law are still true. God still really gets upset if we show disrespect to the elderly, and particularly to our parents. And God says, you will be hearing from me. You will not be experiencing my blessing. You will be experiencing my discipline. So, if you are here and you've been showing disrespect to a parent, grandparent, elderly person, change that. God's very serious about this. You will not be living a quality life and have that going on. Make sure you change that. Repent, change that today. That's very important to God. The first half of honoring your parents is having a heart that truly values them. This is in your insert. Having a heart that truly values them. That's what the word honor means. A heart that truly values them. Now, what do you do if you have a parent, grandparent, and they haven't treated you well? When you think about them as being valuable, they haven't been there for you. They haven't helped you out. They pretty much have not made your life better, and maybe they made your life worse. How do you truly value them? We mentioned this before. You value them for their position that they hold in your life, even if their personal qualities don't live up to that. You only have one set of parents. God says there's nobody else in the world with that position. You honor them for that position, even if they are not living up to being worthy of respect. If you're pulled over by a policeman and he's talking to you and you happen to know he's got some personal problems at home, do you still have to respect him? Absolutely you do, because of his position. And in the same way, parents, grandparents, they hold this unique position in your life like no one else does. And alone, because of that position, you give them respect, treat them as special. Don't treat them as other people. Respect them, even though they might not be living worthy of that respect. So the first half of what it means to honor God is having a heart that truly values them. The second aspect in your insert is having actions that show you value them. Not just a heart attitude that values them, but you're actually demonstrating it by your actions. And one of the most well-known passages for that is 1 Timothy 5:4. If a widow has children or grandchildren, okay, so listen up, these should learn, first of all, to put their religion into practice by caring for their own family, and so repaying their parents and grandparents, for this is pleasing to God. Here God commands that children and grandchildren take care of your parents and grandparents as a form of repayment for all that they did for you. They took care of you when you were helpless and needy, and now as they're getting older, you have a responsibility. Take care of them, and don't expect the church to do it. Paul said, don't take care of elderly parents if their kids and grandkids are around to be able to do it. That's their first responsibility. If you've got elderly parents and grandparents, God says it's not just a nice idea, it's your obligation to repay them for what you did. This is what God expects. Suppose you decide you're not going to do that. You're going to ignore your parents and grandparents. Look what God says, 1 Timothy 5:8. If anyone does not provide for his own, especially for those of his own household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So I stand up today and say, you know what? I'm done. I'm no longer a Christian. I'm turning my back on Jesus Christ. That level of sin is exactly the same as the level of a person not taking care of their parents or grandparents. As shocking and terrible as that sin is as shocking and as terrible is the sin of not taking care of your relatives, your parents, and your grandparents. God's serious about this. He says, make sure you are taking care of the older generation. That's his plan. So God says our actions must show that we honor. I thought of two ways that we could do that. Number one, in your insert, how do you honor them with your actions? Number one, treat them as special. Treat them as special. Generally, it's not right to show favoritism. There's a whole passage in the book of James say, don't play favorites. Treat everyone the same. Don't, be biased toward certain groups and neglect other groups. That is absolutely a rule of life, with one exception. Play favorites with your parents and grandparents. That's okay. Play favorites with them because they are special. In other words, don't treat them as ordinary. That's behind the rule to stand up. You sit down for anybody else coming in, but when they come in, you stand up. And again, that's not a rule that we have to follow, but that attitude should be in the heart. When they come into the room, you say, whoa, someone special just came in. That's my parent, my grandparent. I don't treat them like normal people. I treat them as special people. That means what? That you look after them, that you tend to their needs, because they're more needy than they used to be. You let them go ahead of you in line at a church meal. You go over and check on how they're doing. You call them, see if there's something that they need. Don't treat them as normal people. Treat them as special people. That is what God says to do. Treat them as special because they are special. Think for a moment of your parents or grandparents. Are you treating them as ordinary or as special? Make sure you treat them as special. God commands that. Number two, second way to show you value them is found in Job 12:12. Wisdom is with aged men, with long life is understanding. And then it says in Proverbs 23, listen to your father who gave you life. And don't despise your mother because she is old. Yeah, that's ageism, despising someone because they're old. Don't do that. In your insert, a second way to show honor to people is listen to their advice. Oh, grandma, oh, grandpa, you're out of touch. You don't really understand what's going on. No, do not do that. If you're a young person and that's your attitude, old people are out of touch, they really don't have anything, kill that. It's not from God. It's not acceptable to God. What is the command here? Listen to your father and mother. Don't despise them. Don't set them aside. You don't know what's going on. Listen to what they have to say. No, they are not flawless. No, they're not flawless. But they have life experience that you don't have. When I went over to Kenya with my father, which was probably in 2008, we stood before probably a room of 70 young people, high schoolers age. And Bishop Moses said, this man here, in his late 70s, he said, he has something you don't have. All of you in this room have energy. All of you in this room have, intense living of life. But there's one thing you don't have. You don't have life experience. This man has life experience, and you need to listen to him. And then my father spoke. And young people, that is exactly what older people have. They have been where you are, and they've learned the ways to do things right and the way to do things wrong. The smart things to do and the dumb things to do. And they're there for you. God wants you to go through life successfully, and He has provided older people around you everywhere for you to ask and listen to. But you got to do that. And if you're like the present generation, you can say, they don't know. They do know. Now, it may not be up to date, but the principles will be right. They've gone through stuff, ask them. Ask them about dating relationships. Ask them about money situations. Ask them about career advice. And again, it may not be what you need to hear, but there will be something. Skim the cream off the top of their life experience and use it. Listen to it. That's one of the ways God guides you through life, through listening to your parents and grandparents who have gone before you. Don't be foolish and dismiss them as they don't get it. Listen, because in there is advice that can help you. Think for a moment of your parents and your grandparents. Are you asking them for advice? That's what a really smart person does, and a really dumb person doesn't. So don't be dumb. Ask them for advice. That's what God says to do. All right, so it's Grandparents' Day. It's all about honoring those who are elderly. Those of you who are grandparents or grandparents' age, we thank you so much for all you've done in the church. This church exists and runs and has had a great track record, largely because you have been so helpful. But you are not done, okay? You are not done. You don't just cruise for the rest of the time. You still have a powerful influence to have upon our generation if you will walk with God. Pour your energy into walking with God all day long. Go beyond your time of devotions and just extend it so that from the moment you get up to the moment you get done, that's your time of devotions. Because you're talking with Him, living with Him, choosing Him, loving Him, walking with Him. Do that and you will influence the next generation, your children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, in a powerful way like Enoch did. Do that. Okay? And if you are still young, honor and show great respect to parents, grandparents, and the elderly that are around you. Treat them as special because they are special. Don't treat them as ordinary. And listen to their advice. Don't neglect it. God loves us, and He wants us to live in the best possible way, and He's showing us here today how to do that. Lift up and respect the elderly among us. That's what God says. All right, let's make sure we obey Him.